Well, welcome to another episode of My Life in Football. And this one, well, we said we've had some big shows before, but this one's probably the biggest of the biggest because we are absolutely, and it's an absolute pleasure and an honour to have Noel Mooney, of course, the Chief Executive of the Football Association of Wales, which is just mind blowing to say that we've got somebody of such importance on the show to tell us his story. But a massive welcome, Noel.
Hi Dave, great to be on. I've been on with you before, and I really appreciate your show. So you've blown me up too much, I think, there in terms of role, but I'm looking forward to talking about my life in football with you.
So now we always sort of start the show off a little bit about how things are here. I mean, and then go back to the beginning and sort of come back again to where we are today. So, I mean, how do you feel the season's gone for the Football Association of Wales, this year?
Yeah, we've had like as the CEO, I'm responsible for delivering the strategy of Welsh football, and that goes right from the national teams down to grassroots to the entire pyramid really of football in Wales. We've made huge progress in terms of areas like grassroots facilities. I mean, the next few weeks we're about to give out another £5 million to build more pitches across Wales, and it'll be 20 million over the last 2 years. So that gives me immense pride that we're building the pitches that we need to do across Wales. We've also developed a lot of grassroots support for our clubs. And then if you go right up to I suppose the performance national teams were a penalty kick away, as you know, from getting to the Euros in Germany with the men's team. The women's team have won their first two games in the European qualifiers. So we're on course to qualify for our first women's Euro as well. So our under 17s have qualified back to back now for European Championships. They're going to Cyprus this summer, which it had been 41 years. Mark Hughes was playing in the last youth team
Wow.
that had got to Euros. Now we've done it back to back year after year. So I say we're going to Cyprus. And like the girls' youth teams are doing very well as well. So across what we're doing in Welsh football, we don't have the same population as England. Um, but what we do have is a football association that's progressing very quickly and very well. We've got a lot of agility, and we're still producing a lot of very good players, both female and male, right across things. Now, in the Cymru Premier Division, we've recently announced a £6 million investment into the Cymru Premier Division, which, we're 52nd in Europe. We want to go way up the charts on that. So to do that, we need resources and people and players and stadia and so on and so forth. So I'm really proud that after 30 years of the League of Wales, the Cymru Premier Division, um, we're now really putting our money where our mouth is and investing in this league, and we should see significant results in the years ahead. So, to be honest, David, I feel very optimistic about the future for Welsh football. The national men's team have gone through, halcyon days, I suppose, of getting to the semi-finals of Euros and different things, getting to Euro 2020, getting to World Cup 22 in Qatar. So one after the other, we've had hits, I suppose, and that has allowed us to, I suppose, get the resources to build upon the success of the past. And like the future for Welsh football is extremely bright. We've grown the staff here, for example, in the FAW from around 65 people when I joined 2.5 years ago to about 170 now. So that's pretty explosive growth, I would say. But we need that to provide the services for the grassroots right through to the Cymru Premier Division, to the Adran League, which is our top flight, the women's game, which is growing as well. I mean, if you look at the women's league, I mean, you're wearing a Wrexham shirt there, for example. I was up in Wrexham last year where there was 9,000 people at a Division Two women's game with Wrexham against Connah's Quay. So we're seeing the glitter from the Hollywood effect of Wrexham go right through our own pyramid as well. And I mean, this Sunday we've got the cup final between Cardiff City and Wrexham in the women's cup final. We'll have a big attendance in Rodney Parade in Newport for that. And the interest in Welsh football generally is growing. We've got almost 120,000 people playing football every week registered. Um, the FAW is the most trusted brand in terms of sport, and football is the highest interest and participation sport in Wales, which is important to us, obviously, because we do have other big sports like rugby in Wales. But the fact that we're the number one sport in terms of interest and awareness, I suppose for the first time in a long time, we've crossed that Rubicon, I guess. And now our job is to keep building on that and to keep building all the elements of Welsh football to make sure that we keep reaching our potential.
No, absolutely. And I assume before we go, but to start your story, I assume, the Wrexham thing must be a massive boost for Welsh football, full stop. They don't seem to be just concentrating on Wrexham. They seem to be concentrating on the whole sort of thing in Wrexham itself.
It's great. I mean, they've even gone wider and talked about the Welsh language and Welsh culture, identity, and different things, which is fantastic. I mean, I watched the Welcome to Wrexham over the last few weeks, actually, and enjoyed every moment of it. I mean, my sister rang me the other day from the west of Ireland and said, will you do me a favor? Will you bring me to a Wrexham game? Now, my sister is interested in football. She's an Arsenal fan, which I'll talk about a little bit in a while of how that happened. Um,
She's a
but
good lady.
she, yeah, she is. She is indeed. So both my sisters are Arsenal fans and my brother. So the whole family. That's a lifelong affair. But I'll talk about that shortly when we go back to the start. But the Wrexham effect has definitely helped Welsh football massively.
So going back then to how for your story, I mean, how did Noel sort of get involved in football first? Was it from school, parents? Was it playing? I mean, how did you sort of get involved in football from the very start?
Well, I'll go back to year dot really. My mum and dad, or actually before year dot for me, because my mum and dad would have taken what was a well-worn path from the west of Ireland, where there was nothing really happening in the 60s and 70s, to get on a train or a bus and go to London. So they met in a dance club on the Holloway Road, and they lived in the Holloway Road area, which was where I was born. Now, what's quite interesting about that is that both my brother and sister who were older than me, were born in Wales. So the family kind of moved across Britain, if you will, from Ireland. And by the time they got to London, I had a brother and sister who had been born in Wales. I was born in London. And it was quite easy actually to become an Arsenal fan because they were next door to us. So my dad used to bring me to watch Arsenal when I was 2 and 3 years of age. Goalkeeper was Pat Jennings. The right back was Pat Rice.
Yeah.
David O'Leary was playing. Liam Brady, Frank Stapleton. I think it was seven Irish players in the Arsenal team at that stage. So for, an Irish immigrant family living in London, I suppose then, Arsenal was our local team. And what was interesting was, and I think this is where my love of growing the game really comes from, is that we were playing football on the streets, basically in the park, beside Arsenal, beside Highbury then. At 4 years of age, my parents decided to move back to the west of Ireland, back to the village where my dad was from. And that was quite a shock for me because I arrived with this little Cockney accent, loving playing football with my Arsenal jersey, to realise that in our school and really in the village, football was not the sport.
Mm.
We had our own Gaelic sports, hurling in particular, and Gaelic football, which was very much encouraged culturally and encouraged in the schools as well, contrary to soccer, I suppose, as we call it then, in the west of Ireland. So, I mean, it was interesting for me because this sport that I loved, that had my heart beating much faster, was, I suppose, frowned upon really, because it was a British sport, being played in the west of Ireland, which, culturally was much more, I suppose, prone to Gaelic sports. And I understand that. I mean, that I love playing Gaelic sports, I have to say, but my heart beats for football. And the fact that I've been in football from that age to now, I mean, I've worked in football since I was 16. So I've devoted my life today, at least, to growing football. So what was interesting was, my friends and I played football all the spare time we had at that young age in Ireland. So in school, we would play hurling. But when school finished during the lunch breaks, we were all playing football, because we wanted to be Liam Brady or we wanted to be Pat Jennings, whatever it was. And I was actually quite good as a young footballer. So I decided at a young age I wanted to be a footballer. At 12, there was still no football club in my village. But what happened was very interesting. Jack Charlton became manager of the national team in Ireland, and qualified us for Euro 1988 in Germany. Our first match was against England, and Ray Houghton, if you recall, scored the winning goal. Now, that was probably painful for England fans, maybe, to lose to Ireland in that game. But in the broader sense, what it did was it made football extremely acceptable all across the country. So what happened was overnight, goalposts sprung up in villages, in farmers' fields, all across Ireland. 2,000 clubs were formed. And Jack Charlton's impact and the team's impact, because a lot of the team were immigrants. They had moved to England like my parents had, to Birmingham, Manchester, London, at that young age, and had grown up in Irish houses that happened to be in England, essentially. Um, so for us, it was perfect that our first opponent was England and we'd beaten them, with Ray Houghton, who'd probably never lived in Ireland. I don't think he ever had. He'd come from Donegal, his parents originally, or his grandparents. He'd grown up in Scotland, but I think he was in West Ham area. Yeah, I think he'd been at Arsenal actually as a kid, as a schoolboy at Arsenal. So this was a perfect image of somebody who had grown up in Britain, but was essentially Irish and was proud to wear an Irish jersey, obviously, and score the winning goal against Peter Shilton, of all people. Um, and that for us was massive because, as I say, overnight almost, soccer, as we called it, became massive. And that it's to this day is the number one participation sport in Ireland. And that Jack Charlton era was a huge, it brought a huge acceptability factor, I suppose, to football. And the likes of Paul McGrath or Mick McCarthy or Packy Bonner, these all became household names then, and these all became our heroes. So that was a big step for us. So then you go on, I got to 12 years of age and we'd no football team. So at 12, I was figuring out how do we set up a football club in our village. So 12 years of age, I was part of setting up our first football club. I'm still the president of that club today, actually, called Capmore Celtic. And Ray Houghton was recently back with me in the village celebrating the AGM of the club to raise some money for the club. So I suppose things haven't changed that much, really. So yeah, I mean, the club was set up when I was 12. I'm now 47, so that's 35 years ago. So that club still goes from strength to strength, actually. It goes really well. And I'm very proud of the football club and what it's done in a very in an environment where Gaelic sport and rugby actually has become very big, because Munster rugby became very big, and Irish rugby, I think they may be number one in the world now. So for a small island, in sport, it's a monster. You've got football, which is the biggest sport in the country in participation. But you've got rugby, which is enormous, number one in the world. I think we've overtaken the All Blacks and likes that to be number one in the world, or very close to it, certainly. And then you've got hurling, which is a massive sport. Plus, you've got Gaelic football, which is another massive sport. So, as a young boy or girl growing up now in Ireland, you've got four massive sports and obviously a whole plethora of other sports you could play. So, and participation levels are extremely high in all of them. So, we set up the club at 12, but again, I wanted to be a footballer as well, not administrator at 12 or 13. So I got a chance then to be a footballer. And I joined Limerick at 14, which was the local League of Ireland club. And as chance would have it, Sam Allardyce was the manager there.
Oh,
It was his
wow.
first management job, which was quite interesting. So 14, Sam Allardyce was there just for the 1 year he was there. He got them promoted to the Premier League. I was training with the first team at 14 because I was quite physically big, I suppose, as a young goalkeeper. And then Sam got the job at Preston for the youth team, and then he went to Blackpool. And when he went to Blackpool, he obviously remembered me because he brought me over to Blackpool. So as a young player, I was at Blackpool with Billy Bingham, who was director of football, and Sam was the manager. Phil Brown was the assistant manager. And I was there on all my school holidays, going over and back from Blackpool, training with them. And then there was some interest from other clubs. So I broke into the Limerick team. I think I was 17 when I broke into the Limerick team. I had won the FAI Youth Cup, so the Irish Youth Cup at 17. Um, and I got into the first team at 18 at Limerick, played a few games for them, and then I was transferred to Cork City, where I played for 8 or 9 years as the goalkeeper. And we had a brilliant time because we got to play in European football every year practically. We played against teams like Standard Liège, Cologne, Aarau in Switzerland, all these wonderful Kiev, wonderful nights we had playing in European football. We got to play against the likes of Wrexham and Wolves and QPR and Bolton and friendlies and all sorts of things, which was great. And we were getting huge crowds. I can remember playing a League of Ireland match with about 12,000 people in Turner's Cross, packed in before all Seater days. So that would have been, we won the FAI Cup. So I won the FAI Senior Cup in 1994. So yeah, sorry, 1998. I won it with Cork City. So I won the FAI Youth Cup at 94, the FAI Senior Cup at 98 as a goalkeeper at Cork City. And then I went on as a player to play for Shamrock Rovers and to go back and play for Limerick in my latter years. And then what happened was I was in my late 20s. Um, I had done my cruciate ligaments and a job appeared in the newspaper, which sounds very old school, but it was a job in the FAI, in the Football Association, it was the longest title in the whole world. It was the National Coordinator of Club Promotions Officers. So basically, the FAI had just taken over the league, and they wanted someone to hire club promotion officers in all of the League of Ireland clubs and to coordinate that and to manage all that. So I went in, I was 28 or something. I went in there and I did a year with the FAI, and then I got promoted to the management team of the FAI, which was quite quick. So I hadn't yet reached 30 and I was in the management team of the association, which was growing a lot at the time. the FAI was really growing. We were building the new stadium, the Aviva, as it is now, and we had just taken over the league, and the association was growing massively. No different actually to how the Welsh FA is growing now, I guess, in many ways. So I was there 4 or 5 years, and what happened was I was spotted by UEFA at various presentations that I was starting to make around Europe on how we were growing football. And I'd really focused on the marketing side of the game, how to grow the game. And I was given lots of talks and starting to write papers on how that should happen. And I was asked to write a paper for UEFA on how to grow European football. So I spent the whole weekend locked away and I wrote this big long paper of how they could grow European football. And I sent it through to a very key person at UEFA who read it. And a few days later called me and said, can you come over and explain this, what your concept is of how we grow European football, which I did. And they said, basically, when can you start? So I joined UEFA in 2011.
Can I ask what was
I
that? What
spent,
was that
yeah,
like? What was that like, Noel? I mean, sort of going into that sort of role, into the administration role, and then
yeah,
you're doing stuff for the FIA, and then all of a
yeah,
sudden you get that opportunity to do something for UEFA.
yeah.
What was your feeling, sort of, maybe on the plane going over there? I mean, how nervous were you to go in?
Yeah. Oh, but it's a really funny thing, Dave. I'd studied so much the game from a very young age, and I'd studied the components required to build up a football club or a national association. I'd be very much a student of how you do things. So, yeah, I would study a lot on, say, marketing of football, sports development, participation, public affairs, how to work with governments to sell the case of it. So, it sounds funny, but when I arrived in UEFA, I felt I was home. The first day I walked into the FEI, actually, they were in an old building in Merrion Square in Dublin. Like, I, it's quite interesting how it happened, actually. My father was only 59 when he passed away, and he was buried on a Sunday, raining heavily in the west of Ireland. We buried him in our village, and I had the interview for the FEI the next day, and I'd never been there. And a friend of mine drove me up to Dublin, and I hadn't spent much time in the central Dublin, actually, to be honest with you then. I was just a player who turned up at stadiums and played, really. And I turned up in Dublin, and the gig was to give a 20-minute talk on the future of Irish football. By the time I'd finished saying what I was saying, I felt I had a really good chance of getting the job. And there were six people across from me on this big, huge dining table in the boardroom, Marion Square. Or boardroom table, I should say, rather than dining table. I'm sure there's plenty of dining done there. But by the time I finished speaking, I felt I had a really good chance of getting the job. And by the time I got back to Limerick, where I was from, it was a 2.5 hour drive. I'd had a call from the head of HR to say, look, you've got a really decent chance here. Don't take any other jobs, basically. So I knew I was in. But I remember speaking that day, and then the first day as arriving in the FEI to work there, I really felt, they say, if you work at something that you love doing, you never work a day in your life. If career guidance teachers would have told us to become I don't know, a doctor or a lawyer or whatever the hell it was they wanted to do, a bricklayer, whatever it was. I was never interested in that stuff. I was interested in football, really. So when I got into the FAI, the first days, I knew I was home. And the same happened when I was in the FAI after a few years. I was really comfortable in what I was doing. I felt I was progressing really well. So when I arrived at UEFA, which is this glorious big building in Neon in Switzerland, when I arrived in the front doors, I genuinely felt I was at home. I genuinely felt that not that I was lucky to be there. I did feel some of that, but I also felt they were lucky to have me arriving in because I felt that they had made the right selection for someone who would cast their eye on how European football was operating. I could see what wasn't working well. I could see what needed to be done, and I felt the skill set, which would be communications, diplomacy, um, understanding all of the different building blocks of a national association, which I had worked hard to understand. And I'd studied myself other federations of how they operate. So by the time I got to UEFA, I felt that they were making a good choice to give me the job, basically, to drive this forward. And then what was great about when I moved to Switzerland, for me, it was heaven because I was able to, I was single at the time, so I was able to get into my apartment in Neon overlooking at the lake and spend all my spare time studying various papers of how we could develop the sport. So I felt I got there with a good background. But my time in Switzerland was 10 years. I was head of strategic development for UEFA, which was a very central role in how you grew European football. It was great. I was able to immerse myself in the very best practices from football and outside of football. I went to America and spent time with the NFL and the NBA and MLS. I went to countries like Brazil and all these different places to look at how they develop sport. And I was able to then use and go to the best federations in the world, whether it was England or Germany or France or Italy or Sweden, and immerse myself in all of the things they were doing and then spread the word all around Europe. I helped every federation in Europe to, if they didn't have one, to build a strategic plan for football in their country and spent weeks and weeks in each of them countries, 55 of them, helping them to grow the sport and sit with the board and sit with the council and help them to develop their planning for, say it was participation or schools programs or international high performance or government relations, the whole spectrum, digital transformation, you name it. And what was great was, I mean, I certainly didn't have the answers, but because I was working for UEFA in that role, I had access to the best people in the world. You pick up the phone to anyone.
What was that like though? Did you find that a bit like in the job role I'm in, you almost have to sort of speak to people in different ways to get the same result? I mean, was it that sort of way when you were going around to the different federations that you felt that you had to sort of listen for a little bit first in a meeting to find out how you could possibly get your ideas across to them? But you know, if you went, say, I don't know, if you went to the English FA, you do it in one way, the
Yeah.
American FA in another way, and so on. So did you have to sort of almost think on your feet in them days to try and work out, get your strategy across to them to help them, but it may be in a different way to you would do in the meeting previous?
Well, I thought carefully about how this sounds awful, but your own brand. So, when you think about, the Irish brand abroad, for example, I'd be acutely aware of how attractive that is because the Irish brand is very strong, St. Patrick's Day and different things. And we're quite disarming in how we speak. So if I go into a room of people who are hostile to UEFA coming in, telling them what to do, one of, I suppose, the skills I developed was to disarm people by having some sense of diplomacy and charm and non-threatening. So you try to disarm people so that they trust you, to build a level of trust. Now, that comes in different forms. It could be in the east of Europe where you need to drink a serious, copious amounts of vodka with somebody to actually win their trust over many nights. You need to immerse yourself in their culture. I suppose what's interesting about the UEFA job is you've multi-cultures who respond to different ways, in different ways, I suppose, different techniques in different ways. So, like, for example, I'd spent a lot of time in Georgia, Tbilisi, for example, different parts of Georgia with the leaders building up trust. Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Kazakhstan, Iceland, they all have different ways of doing things. Spain, just different ways of doing things and different answers. So if you take the English FA as a really good example, the English FA is the biggest probably in the world in terms of revenue because the FA Cup and the international rights and so on and so forth, their revenues are enormous. And their responsibilities are enormous equally, and their distribution is enormous, which is great. But the attitude of an English FA looking at UEFA, trying to collaborate with them, I found it changed over time. So when I first met the English FA, they probably looked a little bit to kind of go, we kind of know what we're doing. Do we need all this? But they actually were very good, I have to say, the English FA in a couple of different ways. One was they weren't arrogant. They actually did feel they could benefit from listening to other European federations and from the way for what we were doing. So they really progressed in that area. And to give them a huge amount of credit, they were very happy to share what they were doing with other federations, which was crucial as well. There was things that were happening in England that were quite advanced, that was really good for other federations to see, to at least get some insight into how things could be done. But as I said, the English were very good to learn from other federations too, on what the Germans were doing or the French were doing, and so on and so forth. So that worked really well, I would have to say. Then you'd have different, like in Eastern Europe, for example, there's that kind of strongman culture, that kind of where you've got to be quite forceful almost in how you say something. This kind of playing around the edges doesn't really work with them. You've got to walk in, shoulders up, chest out and say, this is how it happens. And it felt to me that they responded better to confidence in what you were saying rather than a kind of bumbling Hugh Grant type self-deprecating model, which would work better in our part of the world, I guess, where you can disarm people and bring them with you. In the east of Europe, to me, it seemed it was much more strong arm kind of stuff, or um, strong belief in what you were doing. And that's just cultural thing. That's not right or wrong. It's just how cultures work. What I did find is we built something excellent. We built this concept called grow, a very simple word and a very simple concept. But the idea was that how could we help countries grow their football? So I went to, at the time, it was Michel Platini and Infantino actually was general secretary. And I went to them and presented this concept I had developed called with the federations called grow. And what it meant was we were centralizing the rights of the national men's team at the time, so driving more revenues through the federations. But the concept was really there was four pillars. One was the image of football. This is really interesting because FIFA had just got into huge trouble, obviously, with corruption and fraud and all that kind of stuff. So we had the Bordeaux Lac, the arrest, and all that kind of stuff. So it was good timing to walk into our leaders and say, look, I'm proposing that we do independent research in every single one of our countries and present back to the federations what the people feel about their federation. That was quite controversial at the time, but they bought it, thankfully. Digital transformation, a lot of the federations were not embracing the digital revolution that was going on. So we said that we would help every federation to build a digital strategy, how to build their mobile technologies, their web technologies, their social media presence, and so on. The third one was about participation. Despite the billions and gazillions that was running through European football, very few federations had a coherent participation plan, which is basically each age group. How would you get more girls and boys to play football strategically and systematically? They had programs coming out their ears, but there was no actual strategic plan for how you grow participation. So we proposed that we'd help every federation to grow participation. And what was interesting about that was I had written a thesis in a master's I had done, which was the link between participation and consumption, which means basically, if you play football at a young age, you're far more likely to buy a shirt, to buy match tickets, or to buy a TV subscription to watch the game, which is why you get in places like the UK, participation is enormous at a young age. Therefore, consumption is extremely high throughout football pyramid at all the levels because people know the sport, they've played it in school. Whereas if you go to somewhere like Azerbaijan, where football was not huge in terms of participation, consumption is actually very low at the top end. Attendances at league games are very low because people actually haven't played the game that much in certain countries in Eastern Europe. And you've breakdowns like in Eastern Europe, for example, the concept of a volunteer is foreign to them because they've come out of communism, for example, where people were paid to do um, communal things, I guess. The concept of doing it for free was non-existent to them. So whereas in the UK or Scandic countries, Nordic countries, it's social capital to volunteer for your local football club. You become a pillar of society. You're respected by your peers because you give your time for free to offer very little money for your football club. In Eastern Europe, that was seen as a bit stupid thing to do. Why would you do that when everyone was paid to do something? So that was quite interesting cultural phenomenon for me. The last pillar of the four, actually. So you've got image of the game, digital, participation. The last was revenues. So the growth of revenues in European football was growing massively at the top end. But a lot of our federations were very reliant on FIFA and UEFA for handouts, basically. What we were trying to do was get the federations themselves to learn how to build their own marketing and commercial capability. So we would help each federation to do a full commercial plan as to how they would grow their revenue. So these four pillars were interrelated. If you'd less people playing the sport, you'd less revenues coming to the game. If you had more people playing the sport, the image would be better, more digital engagement. So they were all reliant on each other, the four pillars. And somehow we got that agreed with all 55 federations, and we put a big budget in place. And my job then was to grow football across Europe. So I was the head of grow. So that was from, as I say, from Ireland to Iceland, from Iceland to Siberia, from Siberia down to Israel and across to Kazakhstan. That was 55 countries across Europe, which was a huge challenge. And then when we built that, we got a lot of requests from outside of Europe. So I found myself in places like South Africa or in South America or in UAE or Saudi Arabia or Malaysia, helping them because UEFA's brand was so strong on how to put together their development for football. So that meant that I basically had a global view of how the game was being driven. And we had a lot of data and insights into how to grow football and why football was growing, and how we could continue to build them. So what the important thing for us was not to get complacent because we were generating a lot of revenue and a lot of interest, was to make sure that we had proper business-like. So we're taking a lot of lessons from business, from the McKinseys or Deloitte's and that PwCs into the football world, and how we could distribute the revenue back down through the sport to make sure that at grassroots level or non-league level, they could also see the spoils of Champions League. So you basically were immersed in the whole of football, really, which was lovely for 10 years. And I really enjoyed it. Was having a great life in Switzerland, all great until my own association back in Ireland essentially became bankrupt. And I got a call to say, would you be interested in managing the association ad interim to try and help us not go into bankruptcy? So this is 2019. So I decided to leave my five-star job in UEFA to go and help my own country. And I went back to Dublin and I walked into an association that was really on its knees. And I spent 6 months working through how would we ensure that we didn't end up in bankruptcy and create a platform that would allow the association to come out there. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, it was 16-hour days. It was full on, very intense, a lot of media interest, a lot of government interest, a lot of all sorts of interest. And that was it. I was having my first child at the time as well. So it was quite a difficult period. But I would say, as part of national service, I, what actually happened to me psychologically was I remember when I was very young arriving back from London to the west of Ireland where football wasn't loved, particularly. And arriving back to Dublin in 2019, the game had almost imploded. And that was quite interesting because it reminded me of when I was very young, of when the game was in a difficult place, and you had to summon up all your energy and the skills you'd learned to try to help the sport to come out of a very sticky wicket. Thankfully, that happened. So after 6 months, I returned to UEFA, back into my job at UEFA, which was fine. But what had happened then was, I suppose, I had a taste of what it felt like to run a football association. And I quite like from going from doing a decade of being telling people how to run their football or guiding people how to run their football associations. I really wanted to put all that into practice. And as luck would have it, the Welsh FA job came up in 2021. I knew in my heart and soul it was time to go and run a football association. Even though I wasn't Welsh, I felt I was perfectly placed, having seen how it all worked around the world, on finances or HR structures of associations. I had spent years doing it. It was time to go to an association to put all that into practice. And I mean, coming to Wales was an interesting challenge. But I mean, in 2023, we became the UK's best sports organisation according to the sports industry. We won a lot of awards with Welsh sports and different bodies because we're progressing really, really well. And while, as I say, we may not have the resources of England, we do have a footballing loving country. We do have brilliant footballers. We do have a great interest in the sport right across the country. And what we've got to do is make sure all you can do here is make sure Wales reaches its full potential. That's what you're looking to do. It may not be, as say, a France or a Germany in terms of scale, but if we can reach our full potential, and if you look at our league, as I say, we're 52nd out of 55 in Europe because the anomaly that we have, where our top teams play an English system, I mean, that's a complete anomaly across Europe. It happens virtually nowhere. So that's a very strange situation you find yourself in, where Cardiff City, Swansea, Wrexham, Newport County, and so on play in the English system. That's an anomaly. And that's something that we've had better top players, whether it's Aaron Ramsey or Gareth Bale or Jess Fishlock, they've played in these clubs. They play in the English system. So we've been massive beneficiaries of that, and we should be delighted about that. But also, it's incumbent on us now to make sure the Cymru Premier Division goes up the charts. And as I say, we've just been so proud to announce that £6 million injection into the game. The first time, really, that the FAW has put its money where its mouth is in terms of the league, really. So we're going to hire a lot of people over the next few weeks that will be going into the football clubs. We're hiring a lot of staff here to drive the marketing communication of the Cymru Premier Division. And for all your viewers and listeners on this show, look out for the Cymru Premier Division because it's going to grow a lot over the next few years, and we're going to build the stadiums across the clubs. And I think we're going to be a very attractive proposition for fans to come and see our matches. I mean, if you look at the League of Ireland, for example, my first job, as I mentioned, was going into the League of Ireland. We took over the league because it was bankrupt essentially in 2006, 2007. You won the league and it meant certain death basically for the club. So we had Drogheda won the league, went into administration. Shelburne won the league, went into administration. It was the curse of winning the league because you probably overspent to win it. So we were one of the first countries in the world to bring in financial fair play in Ireland. You could spend 65% of your turnover on player salaries, for example, back in 2007. That was quite revolutionary at the time. The League of Ireland now has got sold out signs a lot of the time on its gates at the weekend. I mean, if you look at, you've got Bohemians and Shamrock Rovers are playing tonight, for example. Um, that's sold out. Um, all Bohemians matches are sold out. All Shamrock Rovers season tickets are sold out, I believe. The likes right across the country, Sligo Rovers, they're sold out in a lot of their games, which is fabulous and pays testament to all the works that went in. Our job now in Wales is to make sure in the Cymru Premier Division that we get the sold out signs on our gates. We build bigger stadiums, bigger attendances. And I've no doubt, Dave, that our league will grow from strength to strength, and hopefully, the we reach our full potential over the next few years.
So, I mean, I suppose one question picking up from what you said early doors there, you still an Arsenal fan?
Massive. I'm going to Arsenal and Everton the last game of the season in hope that it's we're picking up the trophy, that we do manage to usurp Manchester City and all of their glory and success that they've had over the last few years. Because like what I do like about Arsenal is that fair enough, they have a lot of resources and they're in the Premier League. A lot of their values have stayed true, which is important. They've managed somehow, even in the age of commercialization, there's still a spine running through the club that is still like the Bank of England, as they used to call them. Yeah, they still have these values, even though they're American owned now. They've managed to, and the various CEOs that have gone in, whether it's Venai now and even Gazidis before that, who I knew from my role at UEFA, they all seem to uphold them values, which was really important to me as a fan. I suppose if you look at the film Fever Pitch, a great movie, which was about someone who I support Arsenal through the really bad years, I suppose, of the 80s. And, we got to 1989, 87, I suppose, and Charlie Nicholas scored the two against Liverpool. It was the first game, I think, where Ian Rush, who's a great friend and works for the FAW, he scored for Liverpool and they got beat. I think that was the first time. I remember hearing Ian Rush score in the first half against Arsenal at Wembley, and the commentator saying, when Ian Rush scored, Liverpool had never got beat. And thinking, oh, here we go. And thankfully, Charlie Nicholas turned up with two goals and we won. And that was the first time I really felt success as an Arsenal fan, to be honest with you, at my age. And then we went on, we lost to Luton Town, obviously, the year after, and it was good. But the following year, of course, was the breakthrough where, we beat Liverpool 2-0 up at Anfield, and Alan Smith and Michael Thomas scored. And I just remember that night. The truth probably is that when we won the league that night, it probably was the end of a journey for me of having the miserable years that many of your fans will know what that feels like with their clubs, to reach in the top of the mountain. We'd won the league at Anfield. It was massive at the time. And I suppose, like Fever Pitch, when that night happened, I think something happened inside me too, which was probably my love for the club. I wouldn't say diminished, but it was a different relationship then. We won the league and it became very successful. They went on to become a global brand from that, like a number of clubs in England. And it probably changed my affair with the club, if you want to call that. I mean, it was great in 91. We won the league again when he brought in Seaman and Limpar and Linnigan and all that stuff. And Kevin Campbell made his breakthrough. And we won the league again. Much easier in 91, I suppose. Seaman only conceded, I think, 17 goals that season. And it was a really good back five that year. And then Wenger came along and probably gave it another push in terms of what attracted it, like the Invincible year, where it kind of all came together. I've got to know Arsene quite well through my role as a director of IFA, which does the laws of the game, of course, as well as a director of that, which is a real honor as well. So we've got to spend a lot of time with Arsene, got to spend a lot of time with him and David Dean, actually, to talk about what that was like, to build the club into what it became. But I do think probably 89 was a year where it reached its crescendo for me, and from that on, I probably became more interested in lower league football, more about the building of communities. That's why the League of Ireland was very attractive to me, because when we took it on in 2007, it was really at a low ebb. It was in a really difficult place. Now it's gone through the healthiest time it's ever gone through, I would say, or certainly since the 60s, where big crowds, revenues are starting to come in, good players, all that stuff. If I look across the pyramid in the UK, for example, or if I look at the English pyramid, for example, I go up to Merthyr quite a bit to watch some games there. A lovely stadium. The club is getting stronger, and they've got cool people like Johnny Owens getting involved in that as well in the club, which is great to see. Really nice fan base and really good in that as well. I go to Newport County quite a lot to see them, and I really enjoy going up to Newport County to games. But obviously, we've got that interesting dynamic, of course, which is where in the Cymru Premier Division League we want to make it so attractive. Colin Bay, as you will know, came from the English system back into our system in the last few years. We've helped them build a beautiful stadium at Colwyn Bay. Now, unfortunately, they were relegated just now from the coming Premier, obviously, to Tier 2, but that's a club that's gone from strength to strength since they've come back into the Welsh system. So, what we've got to do is make the league very attractive, so any clubs that remain in the English system would think about us as a very viable alternative. Obviously, playing in the Welsh system gives you access to European football. So, I mean, if I go to Merthyr, which, I really enjoy going up to Merthyr, I really love the people up there. They're fantastic, real good football people. When I walk into the stadium, on the walls, they've got pictures of them playing as Atalanta. Now, if you look at last night, Atalanta, look like they're on the verge of qualification now for the Europa League final. Um, them two clubs have taken different journeys, Merthyr and Atlanta, since Merthyr played Atlanta back them days. But I mean, if you take that, just logically, even playing in the Welsh system gives you access to playing European football. TNS have got it down to a fine art, basically, of playing in Europe every year. Now we've got to look at is how do they get further in Europe? I mean, obviously they're investing more and more into a professional side. How do they get further into European football? Because there's massive money to be made. There's massive resources to come in from making progress in European football. Dundalk, a few years ago, qualified for the Europa League group stage, as Shamrock Rovers did. There's tens of millions of pounds he made for not
I
just
mean,
the club, but also to come back into the system.
I know Anthony Hughes, when we did his interview with him, he actually said he expected, Merthyr to be back in the Welsh system. I wouldn't say sooner rather later, but he said he expected
Oh,
at some point. He said that was his one of his comments to me.
yeah.
he would expect Merthyr to be in that sort of system, but he said he reckoned they'd start in league, the division under the Prem. But he said
Like
he
Colin Bay did, yeah. Look, there's no tension there whatsoever. Just to be, I think that's important to say. We're great friends with the people at Merthyr Town. Like, Don Bowden, who's the Minister for Sport, is a massive supporter of Merthyr. Mark Evans here, I think he's the vice chair of Merthyr. He's a huge figure here at the FAW. We're all pals, So I mean, back in the day, Merthyr, made stayed within the English system, and good luck to them. We've got to focus on getting our system the best it can be. And if ever there was a decision to be made, Martin, they wanted to come play in our system and play in European football, and to become professional and all that kind of stuff, that door will always be open to them. So, as I said, there's zero tension there whatsoever. We don't wake up in the morning and think we'd love to have Martha back. We've got to make sure that we create a league that's so attractive that fans want to come to, that provides that's so attractive to play in, basically, that everyone else would want to play in it. Now, you'd obviously argue that the ship has sailed for Cardiff and Swansea, for example, and the value of their club is tied up with access to playing in the Premier League in England, and that's great, by the way, for us, because we've been huge beneficiaries of, as I said, the likes of Aaron Ramsey coming through a Premier League quality academy at Cardiff City. Look at the first team that played against Poland and Finland recently in the playoffs. Ben Davies, Dan James, Connor Roberts, Joe Roden, all these have come through Swansea's academy, which, if they had been funded from here, may not have had the quality that they needed to produce, international players. The fact that they're part of the English system has allowed their academies to be, certainly at that time that the likes of Ben came through, they were top quality academies in terms of how they're accredited. I think Cardiff and Swansea are now at level 2, the second level of academies now, but they're still very high quality academies that enable young players from South Wales to become international footballers. We're so welcome. Our relationship with Cardiff City, who are upstairs where I'm here now, they train here, they rent from us here. Swansea City down the road, Andy Coleman, the guys, Newport County, obviously Hugh Jenkins has gone in there, who's got a stellar track record of developing Swansea City. The guys at Merthyr, Wrexham. I don't think it'd be possible for us to be any closer to these people. Wrexham rent our training ground up in Collier's Park. You can go there today, FAW headquarters up there in North Wales, and see the Wrexham players training. So we could not be closer to these clubs. We've got fabulous relationships with them, and we're very lucky in Wales that we get the best of both worlds. I mean, I'd often go up to see Merthyr play in the English system. I really enjoy it. And if there's any better roast dinner on a Sunday to go to than going up to Merthyr and have a Yorkshire pudding and gravy up in Merthyr, it's brilliant. The atmosphere. A lot of my friends here in Wales are big Merthyr Town fans. So our relationships are really strong here. And as I say, we get the best of both worlds. Again, though, our responsibility to Welsh football is to ensure that our league, we can't impact the English leagues obviously so much. What we can do is impact our own league, and we need to follow. In Nifl, for example, the Northern Irish Football League is going from strength to strength. The League of Ireland, as I mentioned, is going from strength to strength. Scottish football, because of the power of some of their big clubs up there, obviously it continues to grow. We've got a job to do here in Wales, which is to build our own league, to make it attractive for groundhoppers and for our own communities as well, by the way. I mean, the groundhopper phenomenon is great. If in a different life, I would love to be a groundhopper myself. A lot of my friends do it, where they just go from ground to ground. Like people here, for example, I say Mark Evans, who's the vice chair at Merthyr, Um, Goes to different grounds every weekend. He was at Shelburne and Shamrock Rovers last Monday, I think, to experience what League of Ireland charms were like. So people just like going to different grounds, enjoy football at different levels. And I think because the Premier League has become such a global brand in England, I think there's definitely a movement towards people who want something that's more wholesome, I guess, that's more organic, that's more community driven, and going to places, whether it's Worcester or Somerset or wherever it is, to watch non-league football, I think is becoming more and more attractive to people.
I've got a couple of questions for personal questions more than anything else. Or one's a
Sure.
personal, one's not. I mean, the first question I'd asked you, which is not the personal question, but what in your sort of career of, in administration and also sort of being involved in football yourself, what would you have honestly have said to right now if you was looking back was your favourite game that you've ever been to?
Well, there's two sides. One is that I've played in games, obviously, so one of the things was I was a fan. Being a half decent player allowed me to play in some of the games I'd like to have gone to watch, which is great. So you got a box room seat, I suppose. So one game I would always remember was winning an FAI Cup final. So being at the game where it was packed because I know there was 20,000 people there or something. The reason for that was, sorry, even if I take Turner's Cross, we had a huge shed behind the goals. What was important for me was with that was as a player. I was also a fan of the game, and to see soccer, as we called it, where we were from in Ireland, because we had Gaelic football to differentiate it, to see packed stands for the sport I loved in a city like Cork was really important to me. In terms of going to games, there was a game I really enjoyed, which was St. Patrick's Athletic qualified for Europe, and they played against Celtic in Celtic Park, and there was 60,000 people there. And I always remember watching St. Patrick's Athletic, who'd have played in front of no more than 1,000 people, in front of 60,000 people at Celtic Park. That meant a lot because you saw a League of Ireland club playing against the top side, or Shamrock Rovers, for example, playing against Tottenham in the Europa League not that long ago. A friend of mine, Stephen Rice, scored again at White Hart Lane for Shamrock Rovers against Tottenham. That was lovely, I would say. Then I suppose here, Wales beating the Ukraine to qualify for the World Cup finals in 2022 was pretty special, I would say. To see a group of players who were playing at their full potential. It was obviously towards the end of Gareth Bale's career. He scored the winning goal against the Ukraine. But to see players like Wayne Hennessy coming, I suppose, into the autumn, certainly, of their international careers, Ben Davies at centre half was immense that day. To see a group of players punch above their weight even and deliver a win in front of a loving 33,000 Welsh fans. And also to see, I mean, Ukraine, obviously, there was the war in Ukraine that started at that time. It was quite difficult for us here because, how far do you go in terms of, sympathy on the pitch before the game and that kind of stuff? Because obviously we want to qualify for the World Cup as well. But to watch our fans embrace the Ukrainian fans and show that football was more than just the game on the pitch. On the pitch, we were qualifying for the World Cup, but off the pitch, our fans were showing such solidarity to the Ukrainians around the stadium. Great images of hugs and giant flags, all that kind of stuff around the stadium. That was pretty special, I would say. So Wales against Ukraine was a very special one for me. To see our staff, lifted by the work they do right across, to see the council, the board, to see volunteers across Welsh football, see their country qualify for the World Cup for the first time since 1958 was pretty special, I would say. I mean, the fact is, I'm not Welsh per se, but obviously, as the CEO of Welsh football, I feel a real huge sense of responsibility to people to make sure we do reach our potential, to watch it all come together on that day. It wasn't just the football. I mean, the Amauhid, which was a song that was bought into by our
Was my next
supporters.
question. That was my next question. So
Yeah.
interrupt you just for a minute because that I listened to that song once, a video that I think Mark sent to me, and with permission from yourself and from you, and but I just fell in love with that song. It's just something about that song. It was unbelievable, and it's now my ringtone on my phone
No.
because it's absolutely absolutely amazing song. But that was going to be my next question to you. How did that come about? How did that come about of being basically almost like the new national anthem for Welsh football? It's because when you see that clip on YouTube, and I think it might have been against Australia, that game that's on YouTube. It gave me as many goosebumps as Michael Thomas scoring against Liverpool in '89. You know what I mean? It's incredible video.
Well, it's quite interesting because I didn't know the history of it. Obviously, I hadn't long arrived here from UEFA, I guess. And one of the guys here, Ian Gwynn Hughes, said, Look, about 20 past seven, the game against Austria was the semi-final game to qualify for the World Cup. We're looking at bringing David Ewan, who's, was a guy who had been a Welsh nationalist back in the day, 40 years before that, and this song had come through um, Scarlet's rugby and had been sung at rugby matches and at football matches and different things. And it was about Welsh identity and Welsh culture and different things. It was great. I didn't know it. So when IG, as we call him here, said to me, we're thinking about playing, I said, well, if the players are happy and, will interfere with their warm-up was kind of what I was thinking. They're warming up, they're playing in a big World Cup match. Are they okay? I didn't realize the significance of it. What actually happened was 20 past seven, I happened to walk out with somebody and the song was starting. And I looked around the stadium and everybody was singing in Welsh, which is quite interesting because obviously as an Irish person, we do have a language, our own language, but I hadn't realized how strong it was in Wales, the language, to be honest with you. And to look around the stadium, see everyone singing in the Welsh language, but also what it meant to them, which was really about pride of being Welsh, in simple terms. I could feel something special was happening. When I looked around, I could feel, there was a pride in being Welsh, which was amazing. And the players bought into it, and the fans bought into it, and the staff bought into it. And it just felt like it was something that we could stand on our own 2 feet as a football nation, which we are, an independent football nation, of course, um, and that we could take our place in the world, which obviously playing the World Cup was the ultimate, where Wales as a country could go out into the world and show that for a country of 3.3 million people, that we had our own language, had our own music, had our own culture. Um, and it just took off. It just meant so much. And then we had the video that we brought for the World Cup that we made it our official song, of course, for the World Cup. And Wales itself has had really good times, of course, but it's had difficult times too. Like, we shouldn't sugarcoat things. And there was the whole post-industrialization, the whole post-coal era that Wales has had to deal with. Towns like Merthyr can bear testament. We see Swansea today, obviously, with Tata Steel, thousands of jobs going. And Wales has very much areas of deprivation um, that can't be sugarcoated. They have to be, we feel as an organization, they should be, certainly referenced. When we go to the World Cup, it's not all shiny and beautiful. We do have our issues here, and they were called out in our video going to the World Cup. And the players and the staff and everyone was quite proud of how we did that and how we talked about the challenges that Wales faces as a country. And I think we did it in a very tasteful, in the right way, in a way that could celebrate the Welsh identity. We've definitely got the coolest flag in the world with the dragon. Who else has a dragon on their flag? And I suppose it ignited a sense of what it means to be Welsh, which should be celebrated. And from that, the FAW built up a very strong connection with our supporters and with Welsh culture, which is about being proud to be Welsh, which is a very good thing. We're a bilingual nation that has the English language and has the Welsh language sitting proudly side by side. And that's how we should be: warm, welcoming, but also proud of what we've got here. And that song basically captured all of the feelings that were out there into a very warm, positive celebration of Welsh identity. And we took that to Qatar. We actually brought the singer to Qatar. And I remember one night we were outside a hotel in Qatar, A Sea of Red, and he sang the song to them. And it was just a lovely moment of Wales on the world stage as an independent football nation that was celebrating what we have achieved in Welsh football to the world. I think that was great.
And I thought one last question, because we know you're a very, very busy man. So, I mean, the question for me would be, and I suppose this is where the personal question comes into it. Somebody like myself that is a little bit like you, I suppose, in listening to some of the stuff you said, in the manner of desperate to get into sort of football administration, really wants to help
Yeah.
out that sort of side of it and push stuff forward. What would you say to these people that what would your sort of recommendations be for them to actually go into, to start into that sort of side of football?
Yeah. A lot of people apply for jobs here at the FAW, but they haven't actually done it at club or league or regional association level. So, like, rather than coming straight here, especially a lot of graduates, for example, apply for different things here. My advice to anybody would be to have a track record of where you've developed at, I suppose, a more local level, to be honest with you. So if someone's worked with a non-league club or with a league club and understand the culture of the sport and the mix between full-time people and volunteers, by the way. So obviously I'm full-time here as the CEO, and we've got 170 full-time staff, but they work with an army of volunteers who don't get paid.
Mm.
It's not their job, a full-time job, but they're as professional as anything. So it's really interesting, that balance between the two. Even now, we've just advertised for strategy managers in area associations. First time full-time people will be going in really to area associations. We're hiring for a lot of full-time people going into our Cymru Premier Division clubs, as I mentioned earlier. These are great opportunities. I mean, straight off the bat, I can see 10 to 20 jobs for people who are looking to work full-time in football. But my advice then would be to make sure you've got a skill set and a track record, that, because we all love football. I mean, it's easy to say I love football, I want to work in football. That's fine. But you need to have the qualifications, I guess, or certainly the experience. And also you need to have something that stands out from everybody else. So if you're a manager, I remember George Graham saying this years ago, why do you sign a player? Because they've got something that nobody else has. So it could be pace, it could be power, it could be, seeing a picture, whatever it is, or, tactical awareness. Here we look for somebody who's got something that we can't get from somebody else. So if you interview 10 people for a role and somebody has what they call that terrible term of USP, like this unique selling point, I suppose, of a person, they can bring something to the association that nobody else we've interviewed can, whether it is passion, whether it is a specific skill set. It could be, I don't know, financial, it could be football development. They could have a great skill in participation growth, for example. If they've got something that's really valuable and creates value for the FAW, then that gives them a big advantage rather than just saying, I like football, hire me. They need to have something come in the door that marks them out from it, because lots of people like football. But what is the skill that they bring that will set them apart from the other people that we've met? That's the advice I would give.
And I suppose, no, it's been fantastic listening to you and having this chat with you. It really has. I can't tell you how much it means to me and to the show itself. But we'd like to wish you all the very, very best with the Football Association of Wales. We'd like to, say what a fantastic job I've seen from the last bits and you're doing there. So, and your story's been absolutely fantastic and great to listen to. So a massive thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Dave. A huge pleasure, and good luck to all of your shows, because they're very valuable for football.
Magic. Thanks, Noel.